Hi everyone, today's talk we will discuss about the inheritance, polymorphism and interface. So we will discuss inheritance first, and this will be the part 1 of our discussion. At the end of these 3 parts, you should be able to define superclass and subclasses, override methods of superclasses, create final methods and create final classes. Inheritance. In Java, all classes including the classes that make up the Java API are subclassed from the object of superclass. So a sample class hierarchy, we have object which is the main or the superclass, and the subclass are class A, class D, and the subclass again of class A is class B and class C. Superclass is any class above the specific class in the class hierarchy, while the subclass is any class below the specific class in the class hierarchy. What are the benefits of inheritance in object-oriented programming? The benefit is reusability. Why? Because once a behavior is defined in a superclass, that behavior is automatically inherited by all the subclasses, where you can encode a method only once and they can be used by all subclasses. So a subclass only needs to implement the differences between itself and the parent. How do we derive for the class in inheritance? So simply we use the extends na keyword. So sometimes we illustrate the inheritance between objects in which we could easily identify the hierarchy of each class. So say for example, if we have a public class person and we have a default constructor which is public person, and then if we want to create another class named student, so since a student is also a person, so we decide to just extend the class person so that we can inherit all the properties and methods of the existing class person. How do we write? So public class student extends to person. Public student is the constructor, so we could easily identify that we are inside the student constructor. So when a student object is instantiated, so the default constructor of each superclass is invoked, and implicitly to do the necessary initializations, then statements are inside the subclass constructor are also executed. So let's have an example of inheritance. Suppose we have the class person, the main class of the main object, let's say public class person. Then we create a constructor which is public person, and then let's just add a message that we are in person constructor. Okay, so this is for class person. So let's save. So we save person and we create again another new file. So we have public class student, and we create also student constructor. Okay, so we create a student constructor, then we display standard ln. So we will display that we are in student constructor. Okay, so let's save. By the way, so since we are in inheritance, so students now will extend to person. So student extends to person. So that is the main class of the student class. So let's save. So student Java. Okay. So let's create another class which is, let's say for example, an employee. Okay. Public class employee. Okay. And then employee constructor. Okay. So let's send a message that we are in employee constructor. Let's save. Employee.java. So now we will extend employee to person. So since employee is still a person, so extends to person. Now if we will illustrate the hierarchy of these three, okay, so let's see the hierarchy. Okay, so if we have here person, so this will be the main class, and we have here student, and we have here employee. So student extends, so student extends to person, and also employee extends to person. Okay. So sometimes if we have many classes that extends to too many objects that extends to a class, so we can just draw it so that it can be easily identify or analyze their relationship of each class and object. So this structure here, or the hierarchy, shows the relationship of a student as a person and employee also as a person. Okay, so let's create a main program for these three classes. So we will use these three classes. So let's create a main program. Let's say public class inheritance. Then let's open the main program. So let's save it first. Inheritance. Okay. So say for example, we will call on person, then person equal to new person. Okay, so yeah, and we can also try. Okay, so let's execute this program. So let's go to the directory of my Java program. Okay, so let's compile the inheritance of Java C inheritance. There is an error. So we will remove the again for public on the class person. And compile. Okay, no error. So if we run the inheritance, let's say Java inheritance, so it will display that we are in person constructor. So it shows that we are in person constructors. There are no inheritance happen during this declaration or instantiation. But let's replace it with, let's say for example, the student. So student object student new student. Okay, so yeah, save. So let's try. Okay, so it happens that even though that we just execute or we just declare the object for the student, but still the person's constructor are or being inherited, so it displays from person. So take note that once there is an inheritance, it always starts from its superclass down to the subclasses. Okay, so if we have, so say for example, if we have the main object is letter A, so and let's say B extends to A, and C extends to A also, and D extends to B, and E extends to C, and H extends to D, and let's say I extends to B. So if we try to call the object H, so if we try to call the object H, so the order of inheritance is from, it will start from A, B, D, and H. So if we call on E, so the order is also from A, C, and E. So it is always starts from top to bottom. Okay, so this is the direction. So if we call for I, so the hierarchy will be A, B, and I. Okay, so that is the inheritance. So in inheritance, there is what we call super keyword. So a subclass can also explicitly call a constructor of its immediate superclass. So this is done by using the super constructor call, wherein this super constructor call in the constructor of a subclass will result in the execution of relevant constructor from the superclass based on the arguments passed. So let's have an example. The super keyword means that given our previous example for the person and the student, we also show that example of the super constructor call. Let's say for example, we are calling to this super constructor. So it means that the super constructor call must occur always at the first statement in the constructor, and it can only be used in a constructor definition. So this will also implies that this construct and the super constructor call cannot both occur in the same constructor. As we discussed in the part 2 of the creating your own classes, we discussed about the this constructor call. So if we use the this constructor call in a certain class, we can no longer use it, or we cannot combine the use also of the super constructor call at the same time. So another use of the super is to refer to members of the superclass. Okay, so say for example, super.name, super.address, ibig sabihin is from its superclass. Okay, from its superclass. So let's have an example of the super keyword, the use of the super keyword. Okay, so let's have an example. So let's create a sample in person. Let's have an example of let's override the constructor. Say for example, this one we have string name and we have string address. Okay, yeah. So we override the constructor and we create also a method. So let's say we create here, say string, let's say name. Let's make it private. Private string name. We have private string address. Okay. So yeah, and let's just display the value for address. Name. We have name and then name address. Okay, then we have address. Okay, so let's create also a method, the public string get, let's say get info. Okay, then we will display, or let's just return name address. Okay, and in the student, so we will call on the super constructor call. Let's call it super, and then we have value for name. So Juan La Cruz, and address is say Manila. So we have this place. So it should be inside the constructor. Okay, so if we run, so the inheritance is from the super constructor. So it was, since we use the super constructor and we call on the person with two parameters, ito yung tinawag niya. So instead of displaying that we are in person constructor, so it displays the constructor or the overloading constructor with parameter. So if we want to get also the get info, so let's try if it has value. So let's display. Oops, it should be in here in student. Okay, so let's try. So say for example in get info, so let's just display the values in variable name and address. So from the student, so let's say so get info. Okay, so let's try. So no value being, or no value detected. So nag-display siya ng null value. So ilagyan natin ng value yung data type doon. So just try it. Let's say super.name 1. Okay, and let's say super.address to Manila. So we will just see if there are values being also detected. So we will replace this as public so that it can be accessed. Okay, so yeah. So in this declaration, so since we do not use the super keyword for the constructor, but instead we use the super to its variable, declaration. So it displays first the default constructor for person, etong person ito. Ito muna yung display niya, but the overloading constructor with parameters, hindi niya na ito display. And instead, it displays the value of the method na get info. Yan yung naging value niya. Okay? So we have also final classes. Classes that cannot be extended. So to declare final class, we use public, then final keyword, then the class name. Public final class person. So ibig sabihin, if we use this final to a certain class, it can no longer be extended. So how do we the final methods and classes are final methods that cannot be overridden, declare final methods, and we cannot use it in extending the class. I mean, ibig sabihin ng final. So ibig sabihin, if we have here A, B, so if we extend B to A,
So it means it's okay. But if we declare public final classes class A, so it means that B can no longer extend to A, and even C can no longer extend to A. Okay, so yan ang ibig sabihin ng final. Okay, so thank you.